The hum was my world, a low, constant thrum that vibrated up from the grated floor, through the soles of my boots and into the marrow of my bones. It was the sound of a million filaments burning bright, the lifeblood of the Undercity given voice. Here, in the deep down, in the concrete veins of Sector Gamma 7, I was a keeper of the faith, a lumen keeper. My parishioners were the glowing lamps that lined these tunnels, each a small sun holding back the infinite primordial dark. I found a quiet comfort in the ritual. Polish the bell casing of a high-intensity vapor lamp until my reflection was a distorted ghost in the chrome. Check the ion bleed on a regulator panel, the delicate dance of my multimeter's needles a familiar ballet. Listen to the specific pitch of the energy conduit. A healthy C-sharp meant all was well. Tonight, Old Man Hemlock, my nickname for the big junction lamp at Cross Corridor 9, was buzzing a little flat. Probably a failing capacitor. A simple fix. "Easy now, you old brute," I muttered, my voice sounding small in the vast, humming space. Loneliness wasn't a burden down here. It was a blanket. The lights were my company. Their silent, unwavering glow, a better conversationalist than most of the hollow-eyed souls topside. I tightened a housing bolt on Hemlock, and its buzzing settled back into that perfect C-sharp. A contented sigh. I wiped a smear of grease from my glove and gave the casing a paternal pat. Routine was salvation. Order was God. I was packing my tools when it happened. Far down the main artery of Gamma 7, a pinprick of light vanished. Not the gentle fade of a dying filament, nor the sputtering cough of a blown fuse. It was snuffed, plucked from existence like a candle flame between a thumb and forefinger. I froze, tool pouch halfway closed. My blood ran cold. I'd worked the undergrid for 15 years. I had never seen a lamp go out like that. Then came the sound, echoing faintly down the long corridor. A dry, scraping chitter, like 1,000 desiccated leaves skittering across concrete, or shale grinding against itself deep in the earth. It wasn't the sound of machinery failing. It was organic, hungry. Before I could process it, the next lamp in the sequence, a brilliant sodium lamp I called Goldie for its warm hue, winked out, snuffed. The chittering was louder now, closer. It was followed by another, and another, a domino fall of darkness, a rapid, rhythmic extinction rushing down the tunnel towards me. One by one, my parishioners were being murdered. The hum of the grid faltered, its choir losing voice after voice. The darkness wasn't just spreading, it was a tidal wave, and the sound was its roar. Panic, cold and absolute, seized my limbs. I scrambled back from Old Man Hemlock, which was now the last bastion of light between me and the oncoming void. Its brilliant white light seemed to shrink, cowering against the advancing wall of absolute black. The chittering was a physical presence now, a vibration in the air that promised a final, grinding silence. I turned and ran. My tool bag slapped against my hip, a frantic, unhelpful rhythm against the pounding of my heart. Behind me, Old Man Hemlock gave one last defiant surge of blinding white light, a final prayer to a dead god. Then it too was snuffed out. The accompanying pop was drowned out by the skittering, scraping noise that was now directly behind me, a sound that cared nothing for order, for routine, for the simple, holy faith in a well-maintained light. Darkness, absolute and profound. Not the soft, familiar dark of a powered-down corridor, but a thick, suffocating blackness that felt solid, as if the air itself had congealed into something heavy and wet. My breath hitched in my throat, each gasp a cannon shot in the sudden, crushing silence. The hum of the grid was gone. My world, my church, had fallen silent. My hand, trembling and slick with sweat, fumbled for the high-intensity maintenance lantern clipped to my belt. The knurled metal felt alien, a desperate talisman against an unholy night. My thumb found the switch. A click, and a cone of pure white light stabbed into the oppressive black. It should have illuminated 100 meters of tunnel. It should have been a sword. Instead, it was a needle. The beam barely pushed 20 feet before it just stopped. It didn't diffuse or fade. It ended abruptly, as if striking a wall of black felt. The light was being eaten, consumed. I waved the beam back and forth, the crisp edge of its reach painting frantic, useless arcs on the invisible curtain ahead. My rational mind, the technician's mind, screamed about dust, about atmospheric condensation. My gut screamed that I was facing something that fed. Then, the chittering. It was no longer a distant echo, but an intimate whisper. It came from the impenetrable darkness just beyond my lantern's reach. A dry, articulate scrape. Close, so unnervingly close. I could almost feel the vibrations of it through the floor grates. Every instinct shrieked, "Run!" The main service hub, the lift, safety. The words were a mantra. I pivoted, swinging the lantern's beam down the corridor toward my only escape. The light carved a moving tunnel through the ink, and I plunged into it. My heavy work boots slammed against the duracrete, the sound obscene in the otherwise dead air. Run, don't think, just run. But the silence wasn't empty. From within the shadows dancing at the very edge of my light, I heard it. A rhythmic skittering, claws on metal. It was keeping pace with me. I forced more speed, my lungs burning, the taste of ozone and fear coating my tongue. I risked a glance to my left. The beam of my lantern caught the service pipes lining the wall. For a split second, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows between the pipes. Not a shape, but a ripple, a distortion, as if the darkness itself had folded. I cried out, a pathetic, strangled gasp, and pushed harder. The hub wasn't far. I knew these tunnels like the lines on my own hand. Corridor Gamma 7, take the junction at Delta 4, then straight on to the primary access lift. Simple, a route I could walk in my sleep. But now it was a terrifying gauntlet. Every junction, every alcove, every shadow my own lantern cast behind me felt like a gaping maw. The sound was tireless, skitter-scrape, perfectly matching my stride. It wasn't chasing me to catch me, not yet. It was herding me. It was playing with me. A cold, dreadful certainty settled in my stomach, heavier than the darkness itself. This thing wasn't just some mindless predator. It knew the grid. It knew the dark. And it knew I was carrying the one thing it desired most in this world. A bright, beautiful, terrified little light. My lungs were fire, my legs screaming knots of acid and agony. But then I saw it, caught at the edge of my lantern's beam, the hulking, monolithic frame of the blast door to the primary lift junction. Salvation. It was 20 meters of reinforced, pressurized plasteel, a bulwark against any catastrophe the undergrid could conjure. It was my way out. I stumbled the last few feet, slamming my palm against the cool metal of the control panel. My breath came in ragged, painful sobs. I jabbed the activation rune. Nothing. The panel remained dark, lifeless. I hit it again, harder, my fist thudding uselessly against the inert screen. "No, no, come on!" I hissed, my voice a broken whisper. My light darted around the junction, frantic. Emergency power should have kicked in. The door had its own redundant system. It was foolproof. The beam fell upon the source of the failure, and the last of my hope evaporated. The main power conduit, a cable as thick as my thigh that snaked down the wall to feed the door's enormous locking mechanism, was destroyed. It wasn't frayed from a power surge or melted from a fire. It was sheared clean through. The cut was impossibly precise, cauterized and smooth, as if a colossal blade of immense heat had passed through it. Viscous, non-conductive coolant, the same shade as day-old blood, dripped from the severed end onto the floor with a slow, rhythmic patter. Plink, plink, plink. A ticking clock, marking the seconds I had left. The skittering had stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. It was a listening silence, a waiting one. It was just beyond the threshold, just out of sight, and it knew I was trapped. My training kicked in, a final futile spasm of the man I used to be, the technician, the problem solver. My fingers flew to the manual release housing. It was sealed for a reason. Tampering could destabilize the entire pressure system, but reason was a luxury I no longer had. I jammed my multi-tool into the seam, trying to pry the cover loose. Metal screamed against metal. My knuckles were white, the muscles in my forearms screaming. A flicker. My head snapped up. In the far corner of the junction, a single grime-covered emergency light, a relic from the first-gen grid, had somehow clung to life, drawing from a forgotten chemical battery. Its glow was a pathetic, sickly yellow, a dying ember, but it was light. As I watched, mesmerized by this last defiant spark, it began to stutter. It pulsed once, twice, a frantic heartbeat. The light seemed to pull inward, to curdle, as if being siphoned away by an unseen straw. The hum from its ancient ballast whined, climbing in pitch to a thin, pathetic scream. Then, with a final, soft pop, it was consumed. The darkness that flooded the junction was absolute, swallowing even the beam of my own lantern. The chittering started again, no longer in the corridor behind me, but all around. It was in the ceiling vents. It was behind the wall panels. It was at the sheared, silent door. My sanctuary was my tomb, and the silence was its patient jailer, waiting for my little light to finally draw it in. Flight was a fool's errand. The door was dead, the path behind me was death, and to stand still was to wait for the hangman. My mind, stripped of hope, latched onto the only thing it had left, a need for answers. If I was going to die in this tomb of concrete and wire, I would die knowing what was hunting me. There was a place, a ghost in the grid schematics, diagnostic substation Epsilon, decommissioned decades ago, a forgotten appendix of the undergrid, tucked away in a maintenance spur off Gamma 7. They'd abandoned it when the systems became fully automated, but the old hardline terminals might still hold data, archived logs from a time before everything was wirelessly synced and sanitized. It was a long shot, a desperate prayer to a forgotten god of data. Navigating without light was a new kind of terror. I switched off my lantern, plunging myself into the same total darkness the creature commanded. The sudden sensory deprivation was dizzying. I pressed one hand to the cold, weeping concrete of the tunnel wall, using it as my guide. My other hand clutched the inert lantern like a child's security blanket. The chittering was gone again, the silence a pressing weight. Was it confused, or was it simply waiting for the dinner bell to ring once more? I moved in a shuffling, blind crawl, counting junctions by feel. After what felt like an eternity of scraped knuckles and rising claustrophobia, my outstretched fingers brushed against the telltale recessed handle of an Epsilon-class substation. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, a sound that seemed to echo for miles in the dead silence. I slipped inside, sealing it behind me. The air was stale, thick with the dust of ages and the faint, metallic tang of decay. I risked a quick flash of my lantern. A small, cramped room. A single chair before a bulky cathode ray terminal. And on the side of the console, a beautiful, beautiful sight. A manual power crank. A last resort for a total system failure. A relic from an age of paranoia. My hands found the crank. It resisted at first, seized by years of neglect. I put my shoulder into it, grunting with effort. A low groan, a shriek of metal, and then it began to turn. The exertion was punishing. Sweat streamed into my eyes. With each rotation, a faint whine built from within the terminal. After a minute of frantic cranking, the screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly green glow across my face and illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. A simple, text-based command prompt blinked at me. Epsilon.os version 1.3. Last login 7,432 cycles prior. I quickly keyed in a command to search the local maintenance logs. Words scrolled up the screen, fragmented and riddled with data corruption. Flux instability in sector. Unexplained power drains. Rerouting. Technician Jorik reports auditory phenomena. My fingers trembled as I typed, searching for keywords. Creature, anomaly, sound. The screen refreshed. A single log file remained, its header corrupted, but dated from just before the station was decommissioned. It was from a lumen keeper named Eris. Cycle 743, log entry 01. The singing from the wires has stopped. It's a new silence, a hungry one. Something is drinking the grid. We lose another lamp every hour. The darkness it leaves behind feels wrong. Cycle 743, Log Entry 02. Jorik is gone. Went to check the gamma conduit. We just found his lantern. Casing is crushed, but the filament is cold. Not burned out. Cold. It didn't fail. It was drained. Cycle 7432, Log Entry 04. It's a light eater. That's the only word for it. It hunts the brightest points. A shadow that feeds on watts. Sealed myself in Epsilon, used the last of the battery to power the door lock. It's outside. I can hear it scraping. It knows I'm in here. It can smell the terminal light. The final entry was a single, horrifying line. Cycle 7432, Log Entry 05. Oh God, the light is so beautiful. Data corrupted. End of file. The green glow of the terminal suddenly felt like a target painted on my soul. It wasn't just a monster. It was a predator that had hunted these halls before. And, just like Aris, I had locked myself in a little room and turned on a light. The fragmented words of a dead man echoed in the cramped, dusty room, colder than the concrete floor. A shadow that feeds on watts. The knowledge didn't bring clarity. It brought a new, more refined brand of terror. My enemy wasn't just a beast operating on instinct. It was a specialized predator, and this entire city-sized machine was its hunting ground. I was the prey, wandering through its domain with a signal flare tied around my neck. My lantern, my tools, the very screen I was reading, they were not my weapons. They were bait. Every lumen I produced was a cry into the void, saying, "Here I am, come and eat." The paradox of my situation slammed into me with physical force, stealing the breath from my lungs. To see, I had to become visible. To navigate, I had to ring the dinner bell. I killed the terminal's power. The green glow vanished, plunging the substation back into absolute tomb-like blackness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the sudden silence. I strained my ears, listening for the telltale chittering, the scraping of claws on the other side of the door. Nothing. Was it gone? Or was it just waiting, patient as a spider, for the fly to move again? There was no staying here. This room was just a coffin with a rusty door. I had to move. But how? My thinking shifted, the technician's logic twisting into a prey animal's cunning. I couldn't use continuous light, but maybe brief flashes, quick snapshots of the world to orient myself, then back to the safety of the dark. It was a terrible plan, a gamble with the worst possible stakes, but it was the only one I had. I took a deep, shuddering breath, pressed myself against the door, and listened. Silence. I thumbed the switch on my lantern for a fraction of a second. Click, flash, click. The image of the corridor beyond was burned into my retinas. Empty, silent, waiting. I eased the door open and slipped out, my movements slow, deliberate. I moved 10 paces into the ink-black tunnel, senses screaming. The air was cold, still. I dared another flash. Click, flash, click. The corridor stretched out ahead, still empty. I continued this way for what felt like hours, a slow, terrifying process of blind shuffling, followed by a heart-stopping pulse of light. And in one of those pulses, I saw it. It wasn't a monster of fang and claw. My mind, conditioned by a lifetime of stories, simply wasn't equipped to process what my eyes registered. Down the corridor, where the beam of my flash should have illuminated a concrete wall, the light bent. It warped inward around a specific point in space, like water flowing down a drain. There was no shape, no form, no color. There was only an absence, a patch of reality that actively devoured the photons I threw at it. A localized hole in the world. I saw the wall around it, distorted and pulled taut at the edges of the distortion. I choked back a scream, my blood turning to ice. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the sound. That was it, the Light Eater. It didn't cast a shadow. It was the shadow. A knot of anti-light, a living void. My next flash, moments later, showed the tunnel was empty again. But the oppressive feeling of being watched was now a certainty. I had seen the unseen. I was being stopped by a creature that defied the fundamental laws of physics. The chittering was almost a comfort compared to this silent, reality-bending horror. It wasn't just a predator. It was a wound in the universe, and it was patiently, silently following me through the dark. Panic gives way to desperation, and in desperation, the mind finds old, forgotten maps. As I stumbled blindly through the oppressive dark, my memory snagged on a schematic I'd reviewed years ago. Sector Delta 1. Decommissioned Auxiliary Capacitor Room 3. It was an old power overflow station, designed in the early days of the grid to absorb and discharge catastrophic surges. Its most important feature? It was built like a vault. Lead-lined walls, a triple-sealed magnetic lock door, its own isolated power cycle. It was designed to contain an explosion of pure energy. Maybe, just maybe, it could keep an energy eater out. It became my new mantra, my new destination. Capacitor Room 3, Delta 1. The journey was a fresh nightmare, punctuated by those terrifying, instantaneous flashes of light. Each pulse was a calculated risk. I was betting precious seconds of sight against announcing my position to the warping horror that I knew was pacing me in the black. I never saw the distortion again, but I felt it. The air grew colder as I moved, a creeping psychic chill that had nothing to do with the tunnel's temperature. I found the junction to Delta 1 by touch, the raised, gritty lettering on the wall panel confirming my path. The corridor here was narrower, the air even more stale. The floor was littered with debris, and I tripped more than once, stifling my cries of pain against my grimy sleeve. Finally, my outstretched hand met the smooth, cold steel of a vault door. A manual release wheel, heavy and rusted, was set in its center. It took every ounce of my remaining strength to turn it. The mechanism groaned in protest, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the dead quiet. Every turn was agony, my muscles screaming, my ears straining for the sound of the chittering. With a final, shuddering clunk, the magnetic seals disengaged. I pulled the heavy door open just enough to slip through, then threw my weight against it to heave it shut. I spun the wheel in reverse, feeling the heavy bolts slide home. Sealed. Trapped. But for the first time in hours, I allowed a sliver of hope. My searching hands found the power console on the wall. The switches were stiff, archaic. Emergency power activation. Cell bank engagement. I flicked them on. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low hum started, climbing in pitch. A relay clicked. Then another. With a sudden, violent buzz, the room exploded in light. Not the singular, focused beam of my lantern, but a brilliant, pervasive, shadowless illumination. Banks of industrial flood lamps set into the ceiling, dozens of them, flickered to life, flooding the small, windowless room with an intensity that made me cry out and shield my eyes. The light was so bright it was almost solid. After the hours of oppressive darkness, it was like being plunged into the heart of a star. When my vision cleared, I saw them. Lining the walls were the capacitors themselves, massive cylinders of glass and copper, and beside them the emergency power cells, all glowing with a healthy, steady green light. The hum was loud, powerful, a chorus of pure, unrestrained energy. It was a fortress of light, a sanctuary of watts. And in its clean, overwhelming, shadow-baking glare, I finally, foolishly, felt safe. For a few precious moments, the brilliant, humming light of the capacitor room was heaven. It baked the cold from my bones and chased the phantom shapes from my vision. I stood in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle, bathing in the sheer, absolute power of my sanctuary. The hum was a symphony of safety, the glare a divine shield. The thing that hunted Watts couldn't possibly breach a place so saturated with them. It would be like a creature of fire trying to swim through the ocean. I laughed, a raw, choked sound of pure relief. The laugh died in my throat. The hum changed. The steady, powerful drone wavered, dipping in pitch for a fraction of a second before catching itself. My head snapped toward the power cells lining the wall. Their steady green indicator lights flickered. Anomaly, a power fluctuation. My technician's brain instantly cataloged the possibilities. A failing cell, a short in the circuit, stabilizer malfunction. But the light in the room dimmed, infinitesimally, for a heartbeat. I knew with a certainty that was colder and sharper than any fear I had yet felt. It was here, outside, and it was drinking. The fluctuations became more frequent. The lights would dim, the powerful hum souring into a strained groan. Then they'd flare back to full intensity as the system tried to compensate. It was a tug of war. The power cells of my sanctuary versus the impossible hunger of the void on the other side of the wall. A low groaning sound started, coming from the walls themselves. Not the sound of straining machinery, but the groaning of stressed metal. The lead-lined panels began to vibrate, a deep, resonant thrum that I could feel in my teeth. I placed my palm against the cool steel. It was vibrating violently, and it was getting colder, leaching the heat from my hand at an alarming rate. The lights flickered again, more violently this time, staying dim for a full second before roaring back. The indicator lights on the cell banks were now flashing a frantic, desperate amber. Power was being siphoned at a catastrophic rate, an impossible drain that bypassed the shielding, the insulation, everything. It wasn't breaking in. It was simply feeding through the walls. My fortress wasn't a fortress at all. It was a dinner plate. I had gathered all the brightest, most delicious light I could find, locked myself in with it, and presented it to the creature on a silver platter. The groaning of the walls escalated to a high-pitched scream. Fine cracks appeared in the ceiling plaster, dust raining down into the strobing dying light. One of the flood lamps on the ceiling exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging a corner of the room into shadow. The creature seemed to surge into that new weakness. The hum from the power cells dropped to a gut-wrenching moan. The lights dimmed, their brilliant white becoming a sickly yellow, then a failing orange. The room was now a maelstrom of failing light and shrieking metal. In the final flickering strobes, I saw the vault door, my seal of safety, begin to buckle inward, its center denting as if struck by an invisible, colossal hammer. The metal glowed a dull, heatless cherry red around the distorted point of impact before a spider web of cracks erupted from it. Then, the last capacitor blew. The last power cell died. The final, defiant filament winked out. The room plunged into a darkness more profound than any I had yet experienced. The sudden silence was absolute. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the faint, final tinkling of cooling metal. And then, from the direction of the breached door, came a sound. A dry, satisfied chitter. It was inside the room with me. Suffocation. That's the only word for the darkness that followed. It was a physical presence, a weight on my chest, a smothering blanket over my face. The air, thick with the smell of ozone and burnt electronics, tasted of ash and absolute despair. My sanctuary had become my tomb, the airlock to my own executioner. And my executioner was in the room with me. The chittering started again, slow, deliberate. It was exploring its new prize. A scrape of claw on concrete to my left. A soft, dry rustle near the back wall where the power cells had died. It was circling me. It was savoring this. It knew I was here, a tiny, terrified morsel of warmth and bioluminescence in the center of its feast. My mind, paradoxically, became calm. The terror was so immense, so all-encompassing, that it burned itself out, leaving behind a strange, crystalline clarity. Every option had been stripped away. Flight was impossible. Hiding was useless. Fighting was absurd. I was a candle in a hurricane, and the wind was coming. "If I can't starve it," a voice in my head whispered, a calm, rational echo of the technician I once was, "then maybe I can overfeed it." The idea was insane, a death row epiphany. Arise's last log entry flashed in my mind. Oh God, the light is so beautiful. He hadn't been screaming in terror. It was ecstasy. He'd seen the Light Eater, and his last thought was of its beauty. But what if it wasn't the creature he was talking about? What if he was describing the lure, the final, irresistible bait? The creature fed on watts, on lumens, on energy. It was drawn to it, consumed by it. I had tried to hide from it, tried to outrun it, tried to build a wall against it. All I had done was make myself a more interesting meal. What if I stopped running? What if, Instead of offering it a candle, I offered it the sun. The primary illumination core, the heart of the entire undergrid, a contained singularity, a miniature star that powered the millions of lights across hundreds of sectors. Its output was astronomical, incomprehensible. To overload it, to trigger a full system discharge, it wouldn't be an explosion in the traditional sense. It would be a detonation of pure energy, a silent, instantaneous flash that would turn this entire sector into a furnace of raw light. The creature would be drawn to it. It wouldn't be able to resist. A moth to a star-sized flame. It would lunge for that impossible, beautiful meal, and in the instant it made contact, it would be drowned, scoured from existence by a tidal wave of the very thing it craved, and me with it. The chittering was closer now, a dry clicking just a few feet away. I could feel the temperature drop, the telltale cold of its presence leaching the warmth from the air around me. This was it, my last choice. Die here, a frightened meal in the dark, or die a weapon, a final sacrificial lumen. My decision was made. I would stop running from the darkness. I would run towards the light. Pushing myself up, slowly, deliberately, from my crouch, I ignored the scraping sound that was now inches from my boot. I took a single, quiet step toward where I remembered the ruined door was, and then another. I was no longer prey. I was the fuse, and I was going to light the biggest damned bomb the world had ever seen. Leaving the capacitor room was like being born into a universe of nothing. My hand found the warped, cold metal of the breached door, and I slipped through the gap, back into the familiar tunnels, now rendered utterly alien by the total absence of light. My feet knew the way, but my senses reeled. The path to the illumination core was a long and treacherous one, a labyrinth I now had to navigate by memory and touch alone. My hand trailed along the gritty concrete wall, my only compass in the abyss. In my pouch, I had a small mercy, a pack of 3 emergency chemical flares. Not tools of illumination, not anymore. They were decoys, breadcrumbs for the beast. The chittering started up behind me as I moved, a low, inquisitive sound. It knew its meal was on the move. I had to be smart. I had to buy myself time. At the first major intersection, a 4-way junction I knew by the missing chunk of concrete on the corner, I paused. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the wrapper of the first flare. I snapped the vial inside. An intense, glorious crimson light blossomed in my hand, painting the drab tunnels in bloody hues. For a moment, it was beautiful. For a moment, I could see. I didn't keep it. With a grunt, I hurled the flare as far as I could down the right-hand corridor, a path leading away from the core. It skittered across the floor, coming to a rest 100 meters away, a defiant ruby in the black. Then I pressed myself into an alcove on the left, holding my breath, and listened. The chittering behind me stopped. There was a pause, a moment of absolute predatory stillness. Then I heard it. The quickening scrape of claws on metal, moving away from me, down the right-hand path. The hunt was on. I waited until I could no longer hear it, then continued my blind trek toward the core. Minutes later, from far behind me, the crimson glow I could still sense as a faint pressure against my closed eyelids was abruptly extinguished, snuffed, followed by a faint, frustrated chittering. The first decoy was gone. The timer was ticking. This became our deadly game of cat and mouse in the absolute dark. I would travel as far as I could by memory, my heart a frantic drum, feeling the oppressive cold of its presence slowly catching up. Then, at a strategic junction, I'd ignite a flare and throw it down a false path. The second one, a searing white magnesium flare, bought me precious minutes as I navigated the treacherous catwalks over the primary coolant reservoir. The distant hiss of the flare was a comforting sound until it, too, was violently silenced. 2 down. Now it was getting smarter. The chittering was more frantic, less patient. It knew I was toying with it. I could feel it casting about in the dark, trying to sense my heat, my movement. I slowed my pace, controlled my breathing, tried to make myself a ghost. I had 1 flare left. I was saving it for the final approach, the access corridor to the core chamber itself. It was a straight, featureless tunnel. No place to hide, no tricks to play. My last decoy would have to be my last chance. Crawling now, my knees and hands raw from the rough floor, I felt the air begin to warm. A low, powerful thrum, a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat, began to vibrate through the concrete. The core. I was close. The light eater was closer. The cold spot in the air, the unmistakable presence of the void, was right behind me, a palpable aura of cosmic hunger. It was done playing. The thrumming intensified, becoming a physical force that vibrated in my chest and skull. The air grew thick and heavy with the scent of ozone, a smell I once associated with routine maintenance, now the perfume of my own self-immolation. I crawled through the final access portal and into the core chamber. Even in the absolute darkness, I could feel the scale of the room, the immense presence of the machinery within it. This was the heart of the city, and I had come to be its final fatal heartbeat. My hand found the primary control console, its surface smooth and cool. I knew this board by heart. Every switch, every dial, every failsafe. It was designed to prevent exactly what I was about to do. Behind me, in the access tunnel, the chittering returned. It was loud, excited, a frenzied sound of anticipation. It knew what this place was. It could feel the banquet that lay coiled and sleeping within the great machine before me. My fingers flew across the console, my lifetime of training taking over. I bypassed the first heat-sink inhibitor. A klaxon, deadened by the lack of system power, tried to scream, its electronic voice a strangled click. I keyed in the override command for the containment field regulators. The system fought me, demanding confirmations I shouldn't have, but 15 years as a lumen keeper teaches you all the back doors. A low whine started from the core itself, a sound of immense energy being woken against its will. A faint blue-white light began to bleed from the seams of the massive spherical housing in the center of the room. It was the color of a distant star, pure and impossibly bright. The chittering in the tunnel stopped. All I heard was a sound like a sharp intake of breath, a gasp from 1,000 dry throats. The core's light grew, pushing back the darkness for the first time on my terms. I saw the thing then, really saw it, as it emerged from the tunnel. It was everything I had glimpsed and more. A fracture in space, a flowing vortex of non-color that scrambled the eye. As the core's light struck it, the light didn't reflect. It was drawn in, swirling into the central point of the distortion like a whirlpool, making the creature's edges ripple and churn. It was a beautiful, mesmerizing horror. Aris had been right. It abandoned me. The tiny morsel was forgotten. It lunged, not with legs, but by simply flowing, pouring itself across the floor towards the real meal, the pulsating, incandescent sphere of the core. It moved with a terrible, ecstatic grace, a being of absolute hunger, rushing to meet its god. My hands were on the final release lever, the final lumen. A manual, catastrophic discharge switch. The big red button they tell you never, ever to touch. The core was screaming now. The light it was emitting so brilliant it hurt to look at. The entire chamber was bathed in its stellar glory. The creature was almost upon it, its form rippling, seemingly expanding in anticipation of the feast. Just as its leading edge of pure nothingness made contact with the core's housing, just as it opened its void-like maw to drink the star, I slammed the lever down with all my weight. There was no sound, no boom, no shattering roar. There was only white, an absolute, silent, all-consuming flood of pure energy that erupted from the core. It wasn't light, it was the concept of light made manifest. It vaporized the console under my hands. It turned the creature's beautiful, terrible form into a brief flicker of static before erasing it from existence. It was the universe snapping a photograph with a sun for a flashbulb, and I was at the center of the flash. Then the wave hit me, and my world became a silent, screaming fire. Pain was the first thing to return. Not a specific, localized pain, but a universal, full-body agony, as if every nerve ending I possessed was being held over an open flame. I was sprawled on my back, the side of my head pressed against something cold and rough. A wall. The blast had thrown me clear across the chamber. My world was a uniform, milky white, a relentless, searing glare that seemed to emanate from inside my own skull. I tried to blink, but it made no difference. My eyes were open, I could feel the lids moving, but the all-consuming whiteness remained. Flash blindness, a brand seared directly onto my optic nerves. Silence. The second thing I registered was the profound, utter silence. The ever-present hum of the undergrid, the thrum that had been the background music to my entire life, was gone. I had not just killed the core, I had killed the city's voice. The silence it left behind was deeper and more unnerving than the darkness had ever been. The dead, flat quiet that meant millions of lives topside had just been plunged into a darkness they hadn't known for centuries. I tried to push myself up, and a scream tore from my throat. My left arm wouldn't obey, a chorus of sharp, grinding protests erupting from my shoulder. My coveralls were stiff and melted to the skin in places. The fabric fused with my own scorched flesh. The air smelled of burnt hair and sterilized metal. My breathing was a ragged, shallow gasp, each inhalation a struggle. I was broken, blind, and alone in the graveyard of the machine I had served my whole life. The whiteout in my vision began to shimmer, black and red amoebas of damage floating across my field of view. But beyond them, there was nothing. No chittering, no unnatural cold, no sense of being watched by a hole in reality. It was gone. I had done it. I had drowned the Sun Eater. I lay there for an eternity, drifting in and out of consciousness on a tide of pain. The only sounds were the faint, random crackle of cooling, contracting machinery, and my own agonized gasps. I was a broken cog in a dead machine, a keeper with nothing left to keep. Victory tasted like ash and smelled like my own cooked meat. Eventually, from a great distance, I heard shouts. The faint beams of rescue lights played across my closed eyelids, muted pinpricks in my personal white hell. They found me, a barely living relic beside the silent heart of the world I had broken to save it. They lifted me onto a stretcher, their voices a muffled, concerned drone. The last thing I remembered before the blackness finally took me for good was the unfamiliar feeling of being moved upwards, towards a surface I no longer felt I belonged to, away from the silent, hallowed dark I had both conquered and created. Weeks bled into one another in a haze of pain medication and whispered consultations just outside my door. My world was a landscape of muted grays and blinding, painful whites, my vision returning in agonizingly slow fragments. The medbay was kept in a perpetual state of twilight, a mercy for which I was deeply, primally grateful. Sound returned before sight, the gentle beeping of my vitals monitor, the soft tread of the nurse's shoes, the distant, unfamiliar hum of emergency generators. They called me a hero, the man who killed the dark. They didn't understand that you can't kill the dark. You can only make a brighter one. I spent most of my time with my eyes closed, replaying the silent white detonation in my mind. The horror of the creature was fading, replaced by the trauma of its solution. I would see that swirling vortex of non-color, that beautiful, terrible void, and my heart rate wouldn't even climb. But if I thought about the core, about the final, all-consuming release of light, a cold, chemical panic would flood my veins. One evening, a young nurse named Ilara came in to change my nutrient drip. She was kind, her voice soft. "You're doing so much better, Silas," she said, her words meant to soothe. "They say the grid repairs are ahead of schedule. We'll have the city lights back before you know it." My hand tightened on the thin thermal blanket. I didn't want the lights back. I wanted the soft, safe gray of the medbay to last forever. "The psych evaluator said you might appreciate something calming," Ilara continued gently. "Something from the time before, a small comfort." She moved to my bedside table. I heard a faint scratching sound, then a soft foosh. A familiar smell filled the air, burning wax and wick. I cracked my eyelids open, my vision swimming into a semblance of focus. On my nightstand, she had placed a candle. A single, simple wax candle. Its small yellow flame danced and swayed, casting gentle, flickering shadows on the wall behind it. It was a tiny thing, a lumen so insignificant it wouldn't even register on a city grid sensor. It was a symbol of hope, of warmth, of defiance against the dark. And it sent me into absolute animalistic terror. A strangled cry clawed its way out of my throat. I recoiled violently, scrambling backward on the bed, my broken body screaming in protest. My hands flew up to shield my face, as if warding off a physical blow. The gentle, golden light felt like a razor against my eyes, a searing brand on my soul. The flame, the hunger, the lure, the blast. "No! Get it out!" I screamed, the words raw, torn from a place beyond reason. "Put it out! Put it out!" Ilara stared, her face a mask of shock and confusion, as the hero of the undergrid, the Lumen Keeper himself, cowered and sobbed in a paroxysm of terror before the smallest, most innocent of lights. She blew it out, plunging the room back into its comforting twilight, but it was too late. I had seen it. I understood. I had dedicated my life to the light. I had worshipped its steady, predictable hum. I had used its infinite, explosive power as a weapon to save us all. And in doing so, it had broken me completely, leaving behind an instinctual, irreversible truth burned deep into my shattered mind. The only thing left to fear was the flame.